This morning I'd like to talk a bit about that first reading. We have Elijah the prophet, and he goes out looking for his successor. Now he's been told by God who his successor was going to be. Elijah had gone up Mount Horeb, it's just another name for Mount Sinai, and he met God not in the earthquake, not in the hurricane, not in the fire, but in a whispering breeze. And the message there, sometimes God speaks in everyday, ordinary ways. We don't see thunder and lightning. We just hear that whispering breeze. And so Elijah is told to anoint a new king for Syria, for Israel, and his successor, Elisha. And that's where we arrive today. He calls Elisha to follow him. And what does Elisha say? Oh, let me say goodbye to my folks. I don't know if you've ever been in the Middle East, folks. Say goodbye to my folks means a week, at least, because it's long, drawn out. Even just saying good morning could take 15 minutes. So Elisha is kind of saying, I'm not quite ready yet. Give me time. What does Elijah say? I didn't do anything. Basically challenging him. When God calls, we've got to answer. We can't make excuses. We've got to say yes and go. St. Anthony, we're celebrating today. God called him to leave the security of an Augustinian monastery and follow the friars to martyrdom in Morocco. And then God changed his mind, it seems. He gets to Morocco, gets sick, can't be martyred. God called him to go up to a hermitage in the mountains. And Anthony makes the mistake of preaching at a mass, and everybody loves it so much, he's preaching the rest of his life. In spite of the fact that Anthony faced many disappointments for what he thought God wanted him to do, he was always ready to say yes. And that's the challenge for us, that God calls us in many different ways. Sometimes it's very explicit. Sometimes it's a little more subtle. I'll give you an example of kind of an explicit call. We used to teach in a high school a year after we finished college, and I taught physics. Basically, the friars said, what are 3 things you want to teach, 3 things you don't? Guess where physics was? On the don't list. So I ended up teaching it for a year, and the friars asked me, do you want to go to Rome to study? It's a question. I said, no. They asked again, do you want to go? I said, no. My provincial said, Jude, you got to think about this. Take a month. Why don't you pray on it? When Franciscans say pray on it, it means they've made up their mind. You have to change yours. So I prayed, and he said, you want to go? I said, no. And we had another hour, and at the end he said, Jude, I want to hear you say you want to go. I says, Father, if I said that, I would be lying. I don't want to go. If you send me, I'll try my best, but I don't want to go. And so he said, good, you're leaving. Studying in Italy, only word in Italian I know is gelato. So it's great if you want a snack, a little tough if you're looking for the men's room. I study, and there were days after my intensive course, I could speak Italian like a native. And there were other days I couldn't say the simplest phrase. And one day I was so frustrated, I went to the dish room, picked up a glass in my hand, ready to smash it against the wall. And for the friars who know me, I tend to be patient. I was just so frustrated. I went next door to the chapel, actually the place where St. Paul was martyred. And they had Eucharistic adoration. And for the next hour, I knelt and cried. You see, I'm kind of talented with brain power, and this was the first time in my life I couldn't do it. I had to rely on the Lord. And I remember I said that by the end. That was the first time I started falling in love with God. Until then, I thought I was doing God a favor by being a friar. That day I realized the shoe was on the other foot. Or those who know me, the sandal was on the other foot. Never wear shoes. That was God speaking, and it changed my life. We all have experiences similar to that, or again, more subtle, things that happen that just point us in a direction. Why does it take us so long to sort all this out? Because it happens not in our time. It happens in God's time. And God has a different way of looking at it. Sometimes we're slow learners in certain areas. Sometimes God wants us to sort of do the best we can until it's time to do better. I love when people come in and say, Father, I want to learn patience. I pray for patience now. We think in terms of what we want and when we want it. And it's a question of surrender. Like St. Anthony, his surrender. A surrender so profound that towards the end of his life, he could hold the child Jesus in his arms. That's what we're called to. A childlikeness, a goodness, a transparency, and a willingness to go wherever God leads, whether it be to a great place in a great situation, or whether it be to the cross. I had one of those moments this past week. I realized the cross is not something to do. It's a way to live. The availability to say, not my will, but your will be done.